So last week, I was reading a story about a guy that got stoned to death. Oh, terrible. Stoned to death in the 21st century. It's the worst thing in the world. Now, it didn't actually happen in the 21st century. It happened in last week's Parsha. I was reading this, and most of the Parsha was actually, I found really boring. There's a bunch of laws and regulations about certain holidays. Some people like that stuff. It was boring to me. But then the last part of the Parsha, talk about this man who was looking for a place to live. Right? So right now the Jews are in the desert. They're on their way to the promised land, all that stuff. And this man is looking for a place to lay his tent. Right? He's going around and no one's taking him in. So finally he's like, you know what? I'll go to my mother's family. I believe it was the tribe of Adat or the tribe of Dan. I can't remember. And he goes to this tribe and he goes, can I lay my tent here? This is my mother's family. And they wouldn't take him in because his father wasn't a Jew, right? He was an Egyptian and he was born a bastard, right? With his mom. And this guy's pissed. Like you can imagine, this guy, he left Egypt with the Jews. He saw the Torah Mount Sinai. He converted. He was part of the community, and no one would let them live. No one would allow him to live with them. And so he's pissed. He's like, you know what? The law should be on my side. He goes to Moses and he goes, listen, no one lets me in. I'm part of the tribe. What can I do? And Moses rose against him, right? So the law is, your tribe is by your father, right? His father was Egyptian. Terrible thing. But also, when I looked deeper, the Rashi says his father was actually an Egyptian that was killed by Moses earlier in the books. So can you imagine? He goes to the man that killed his father. And he's like, hey, listen, you even killed my father. You won't even let me sit with the tribe. He goes, nope, that's the law. And so this guy's pissed, right? So he does blasphemy. He says God's name is vain. He says the name of God we're not allowed to say. He says it out loud. He yells it. He's pissed. And Moses goes, you messed up, man. Now you have to be punished, right? Every action has consequences. And so he asks God, what should he do? And God says, you got to stone him to death. And I'm reading that, I'm like, dude, this guy's looking for a place to live. No one's letting him in. And you choose to stone him to death. I was pissed. And so, like every good Jew, I asked questions. And my rabbi wasn't around, so I Googled my questions. And I was reading about it, and it was fascinating. Right? And I started reading about why was there even stoning to begin with in the Torah, right? So let's backtrack, right? This guy, his father was killed by Moses, right? His own family won't let him in because he's a bastard, right? His community has failed him, really. Like, this guy is almost on his knees begging for help, and the law was not on his side. And so that led him to do the worst thing he possibly do, say that God's name in vain, and he was stoned to death by the community. But it's interesting, because in the Parsha, before he was stoned to death, God commands, or Moses tells the community from God's words that everyone who heard this blasphemy must put his hand on this man's head before he was stoned to death. Which is interesting, because that's not part of the law. When you get stoned to death, they just stone you. You're screwed. You're dead. But it was interesting that he said everyone put his hand on his head. And there's a lot of backstory about what this means, but really it's everyone in the community had a hand in his death, right? Even think about being stoned. What is that? The community is punishing this man to death. Right, every person's hand is being forced to murder this man. And what does that say about this community? So let's apply this to 21st century, 2019. What does this mean? Is that, yes, if we go by the law, this man should be punished to death, right? He did, it was very clear what happens if you do blasphemy, if you say that God's name in vain, you're killed. But it's interesting that it's his death by stoning, and that everyone who heard this had to put his hand in this guy's head. And it shows us that everyone in the community had just the same part in this man's death, right? This guy was failed upon by his community. We didn't support him. It's applies to the 21st century is that a lot of the time, I think, we hold ourselves to a bit of a higher level than we should, right? We see these people in the news, we see our friends who are really just not on the right path. They're doing terrible things. And I'm not going to go into detail, but we like to think about ourselves, we're such better people. That would never be us. We also have to think sometimes, how did we fail them? Like, I have friends, personally, and I can see them, they're on a terrible path. And I can sit here and say, I just got my college education, I'm doing great. That's kind of a dick thing to think about, right? It's like, how did I fail them? How did my community fail these people that led them to do these terrible things? And so that was kind of a lesson I got from this stoning. That really pissed me off reading the story. It's actually a beautiful lesson of how we shouldn't hold ourselves higher than anybody else. It was part of our, we stone these people to death in the sense that really us not taking action or preventing this person from falling so low, we had a hand in their death. So that's my little rant. I'm at about 5 minutes right now, so think about that. How did we play a hand in people's kind of misfortune, right? And what could we have done to prevent that? Which is kind of a rough thing to think about. Anyway, have a good Sunday.